Thank you. I appreciate the really warm welcome. It's wonderful to come to these beautiful countries, and we've been around visiting, and to bring some of my friends to come speak with you. It's been great to do that. Before I even start, I'm going to, since some of you I know like to study various things, I'm going to give a plug-in for some other organizations as well. Of course, you have FairMormon, but if you like to read, there is also an organization called Interpreter, mormoninterpreter.com, and another organization is called Book of Mormon Central, and that one brings lots of articles from lots of places. So those are three places you can look for good information on the church. So as she said, my name is Scott Gordon. I'm president of FairMormon. We're an all-volunteer group. We run a website called fairmormon.org, and we respond to criticisms of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. While we are not affiliated with the church, we are made up of faithful members of the church, including bishops, stake presidents, Relief Society presidents, former mission presidents, former Area Authority 70s, and others. We've been quoted by Elder Christofferson. We have had our conference talks featured on the official church website, lds.org. We have been featured in the church newspaper called Church News, and some of our volunteers helped with the new gospel topics you can find on their website. And to my knowledge, we are the only non-official website linked to on the Seminaries and Institute page for seminary and institute teachers to go and find more information. So even though we're not officially church, we fall under that category in Doctrine and Covenants 58:27, which says, "Verily I say, men should be anxiously engaged in a good cause, and do many things of their own free will, and bring to pass much righteousness." Now, I will be the first to admit that there are many people in the church who aren't interested in the things we're going to talk about today. They're just not interested. It isn't official doctrine. I am not your priesthood leader. But those of you who have had questions yourself, or who've had a family member leave the church, know how important this information can be. I would argue if you have children or grandchildren, this information may be critical to you. Ask yourself, where do our children go when they have a question about their faith? Do they go to their parents or church leaders, or do they type their concerns into Google? So I had a sister write me last month, and after her husband left the church, and she said, "It is a huge struggle. I spent a few years crying all too often." My sweet friend introduced me to FairMormon conference 3 years ago. I came and loved it. I never had any interest in this stuff until he left, and I realized I needed to have some answers for myself. And especially once my kids started in on me asking all the hard questions. So, one thing I'll tell you, my daughter teases me because I get emotional very easily, sorry. To interrupt my talk a little with another side comment, my family comes from northern Scotland, and I feel a close affinity with the Nordic countries because we all know where the northern Scots came from. Well. So in a talk given to CES religious education people this year, in February of this year, Elder M. Russell Ballard said the following. He said this to institute teachers and seminary teachers. "You should be the first outside your students' families to introduce authoritative sources on topics that may be less well-known or controversial, so your students will measure whatever they hear or read later against what you've already taught them." What I have found is if your children and grandchildren hear the information from you, when they hear it later, it's no big deal. But when they read it on the internet for the first time or from their friends for the first time, then it can be a big deal. He goes on to say, to name a few such topics that are less well-known or controversial, I'm talking about polygamy, seer stones, different accounts of the first vision, the process of translation of the Book of Mormon or the Book of Abraham, gender issues, race in the priesthood, or a heavenly mother. Now, we're not going to cover all these topics today, but we're going to cover a lot of them. He went on to say, "You know, we give medical inoculations to our precious missionaries before sending them into the mission field, so they will be protected against disease that can harm them or even kill them. In a similar fashion, please, before you send them into the world, inoculate your students by providing faithful, thoughtful, and accurate interpretations of the gospel doctrine and scriptures, our history, and those topics that are sometimes misunderstood." So there are various reasons why people leave. Sometimes they have difficulty fitting in socially. Sometimes they have personal issues involving mental health or physical health. Sometimes they have difficulty following the word of wisdom or paying tithing. Sometimes they become romantically involved with someone who isn't interested in church. And sometimes they have difficulties with history or doctrines of the church. There are as many reasons to leave as there are people. We are all on a journey of faith. It is perfectly okay to have questions. Even those who have strong testimonies of the gospel can find their faith wavering in times of personal crisis or in response to something they read or hear. This is a normal human response. In Alma, chapter 32, verse 21, it says, "Faith is not to have a perfect knowledge of things." Finding weaknesses in early or current church leaders is often the perfect excuse to leave, even though that might not be the real issue. But for me, knowing that early members of the church had weaknesses and made some minor mistakes makes it easier for me to come to church in spite of my weaknesses. We all struggle to live up to what we perceive God's expectations to be. Then when we don't measure up and don't feel worthy, it can make us want to stay home and not attend. But church is there for all of us, even with our personal weaknesses. I have heard it said that church is to make good men or bad men good and good men better. The Lord said to Peter, "Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren." Now remember, when did he say this to him? This was after he was an apostle. Now, we might have questions or concerns even after we've had a spiritual manifestation in our life. God asked the brother of Jared, who had already heard his voice and seen his finger, "Believest thou the words that I shall speak?" Even the brother of Jared was allowed room to doubt. In Mark chapter 9, verse 20 through 24, we read the story of a man who brought his son to Jesus to be healed. Then in verse 23, Jesus says, "If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth." And in verse 24, the father responded with tears in his eyes, and he said, "Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief." Some of us may go through our entire lives proclaiming, "Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief." So just as there are many reasons for people to leave, the paths to maintaining faith also vary. The bishop or stake president who simply counsels his wandering flock to read the scriptures and pray more may find that his advice is very helpful for some individuals, but it's less helpful for others. Now, I firmly attest that having the Spirit in our lives is essential while dealing with questions. However, while not saying our prayers and not reading our scriptures will certainly lead us out of the church, there are many who are doing these things very faithfully that are still sometimes troubled. Or to state it another way, one bishop once told me, "Reading scriptures and praying will not fix everything. But if you don't read and pray, you will fix nothing." Each person has different spiritual gifts. That means that some people are able to easily recognize a spiritual witness, while others need additional reassurances to support their spiritual journey. The Lord recognized this in Doctrine and Covenants 1097, where it says, "And as all have not faith, seek ye diligently and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek ye out of the best books words of wisdom. Seek learning, even by study, and also by faith." Now, some members believe if you read your scriptures and pray, you will not have any doubts or questions. On the other hand, other people believe if you read all of the scholarly books and articles on the topic, then you will not have any questions or doubts. Elder Ballard says it takes both. He said, "The effort for gospel transparency and spiritual inoculation through a thoughtful study of doctrine and history, coupled with a burning testimony, is the best antidote we have to help students avoid and or deal with questions, doubts, or faith crises that they may face in this information age." Part of the problem is recognizing what the dangers really are. Many people assume that our critics are people like these protesters who stand outside Temple Square or stand outside our temples. These people aren't usually the problems for us. The biggest concern we have comes from disaffected members who no longer believe. These modern-day laymen and lemuels have left the faith and want to validate their choices by bringing you along too. They have learned that they don't have to convince you of anything. They only have to insert an element of doubt into your mind. And if that doubt is nurtured, then it will grow and destroy your testimony. So this slide shows 4 recent attempts affecting people right now that I deal with FairMormon. We get emails based on all 4 of these works. This first one up here, is a booklet titled "Letter to a CES Director." This is a list of old criticisms, rumors, and misrepresentations that was recently repackaged and put into a single document. Responses to all of these issues have been around for many, many years, but seeing the large list can be overwhelming. I know the author of this book says it's like the 95 theses that Martin Luther nailed on the church door, because there are about 90 to 95 questions in there. So researching each item in this list is daunting and takes many, many hours to do. I know this because FairMormon has done this. Luckily, there are several articles and point-by-point responses to these issues. So here's the FairMormon one. It's interesting, is they did an analysis of what's fact, what's spin, what's mistakes, and what's falsehoods, and you see only the small percentage here is fact. All the rest are spin or mistakes or even absolute falsehoods. Another word for falsehoods would be lies in English. Another really good source on this is one put together by Brian Hales, which is debunking-cesletter.com. And this is another very popular site to look at this. You can also use Google to find responses. This CES letter document makes many false claims and takes true events and twists them around in an almost unrecognizable form. But the biggest problem with the CES letter document is the assumptions the author has made going in. For example, in reading his list, it quickly becomes clear that he firmly believes the Book of Mormon must be a perfect book, and it must be translated in the way that the author thinks it should have been translated in order to be true. So all he has to do is find one little thing, any little thing he considers to be a flaw, and that proves the whole thing wrong. So lists of evidences in favor of the Book of Mormon have no meaning to him, because he has found the alleged mistakes that proves it's a fraud. The problem with this approach is the author seems to have no knowledge of how translation actually takes place or the difficulties related to it. I think you folks understand translation better than Americans do. Americans, we have English and occasionally Spanish, but not very often. And I know he only speaks English. But you know, going back and forth between English to Swedish or English to Norwegian or Norwegian to Swedish, some things don't translate very well or don't translate exactly right. And two people can take the same document and translate it slightly different. And it's not that they're wrong, they're just different. But because he doesn't understand that, he believes the Book of Mormon is false because it has these little translation issues. He also doesn't acknowledge the stacks of research in the areas he discusses, preferring instead to use non-scholarly, anti-Mormon sources and pretending the scholarly sources just absolutely don't exist. He continues to claim he just wants his questions answered, and no one will give him any answers, even though several people have given him answers and been rebuffed by him. He finally left the church a couple of months ago in his disciplinary council with the stake president. So he was called in, and as soon as he talked to his stake president for a couple of minutes, he decided, I quit. I'm not sure why he wanted to stay, honestly, but he did. This second example here is called Mormon Stories. It was established by another member. He was counseled by his stake president many, many times, but he was finally excommunicated this past year. This website mostly focuses on the church's stances on social issues, such as gay marriage and women in the church. I know this man personally and have had many conversations with him. His sister is a member of FairMormon. He has long believed there is no God. At the church's nice social organization, and he's been attempting to fix it for a long time. So he hasn't wanted to leave because it's such a nice group of people. But God doesn't exist. These next two examples down here attack the church from the opposite side. Both of these men believe in God. Both of these men believe in the Book of Mormon. The first one, this one, is from a man who loves to speculate about gospel mysteries. He reminds me of the guy who sits in high priest quorum who thinks he has all the answers. He has become convinced he understands the mysteries better than anyone else, including the prophet. Some of his books have become popular with members because he has a gift for discussing what some scriptures might mean. But he believes his speculations are fact and that people should be following him. A few months ago, he met with his stake president, and he was asked to leave. And finally, this fourth website and book on DNA evidence in the Book of Mormon geography has become very popular. I know it's even going around here in Sweden and Norway. This man is still a member. I have spoken with him for many hours. This man's claim is that he believes the Book of Mormon took place inside the boundaries of the United States. I personally don't believe his theory fits with the description of what is in the Book of Mormon. Much of his material on Book of Mormon artifacts sound enticing, but I believe they're poorly researched because he uses known fakes and forgeries to prove his point. He sells bus tours to his Book of Mormon locations, and he's quite a good salesman. Now, my opinion is he is completely free to believe and even to teach what he believes about the Book of Mormon geography location. Because the Book of Mormon geography location is not a revealed subject. The brethren have stated it has not been revealed. But the problem I have, and I've told him this, is the author claims it is a revealed subject through the prophet Joseph Smith. And he has implied that anyone who doesn't believe his claims are in a state of apostasy. You are not following Joseph Smith. And these apostates, these so-called apostates, include pretty much all of the BYU professors, the people who write the Sunday school manuals, and even the apostles, although the apostles are just deceived by the BYU scholars. I bring him up. I was a little nervous about bringing him up because he's still a member, but I bring him up because his I'm right and everyone who doesn't believe as I do is bad attitude is dangerous to himself and to others. So giving you these 4 specific examples may help a little, but I don't know what's on the horizon. So I'm going to give you some general counsel so you can be ready for the future. When looking at material that seems to attack the church, there are some traps that we get caught in. The first trap is we need to recognize there is purposeful misrepresentation going on the internet. And here's a video I have that represents this. This is a commercial. It's an insurance commercial.
Oh, hey, Mike. Where are you up to?
Just diagramming this accident with my State Farm Pocket Agent app. You can also get a quote and pay your premium with this thing.
I thought State Farm didn't have all those apps.
Where'd you hear that?
The internet.
And you believed it?
Yeah. They can't put anything on the internet that isn't true.
Where'd you hear that? The internet.
Oh, look. Here comes my date. I met him on the internet. He's a French model.
Bonjour.
State Farm, more mobile than ever. Get to a better state.
I know we joke about everything not being true that we read on the internet. But when we're faced with something that sounds plausible, I am surprised how many people fall for it. It's amazing. The internet has created a space to bring back all the really old criticisms that have been fully discussed and examined, but the writers pretend it's brand new. Just for an example, I see the argument that steel is mentioned in the Old World section of the Book of Mormon, so the Book of Mormon can't be true. This is also mentioned in the letter to a CES director. He says the same thing. But in 1987, archaeologists unearthed a large steel sword near Jericho, dating back to the late 7th century BC, probably to the reign of King Josiah, who died shortly before Lehi. This sword is on display at Jerusalem's Israel Museum, and the museum's sign reads in part, "The sword is made of iron hardened into steel." So even though this argument has been refuted since 1987, this false claim is still made all over the internet, and it is in the letter to a CES director. Another example is that of horses in the Book of Mormon. Book of Mormon can't be true because we know the Spaniards brought the horses to the Americas, and since the Book of Mormon mentions horses, then the whole thing is false. Well, I have stood next to those bones in Los Angeles, California. Those are horses from the Americas before the Europeans came to America. There were horses in America, so the discussion now is when did or if they became extinct. While they have not been directly matched to Book of Mormon times, this criticism isn't the easy claim the critics claim it is, because it's pretty close to the times. Often we are presented with critical issues that cite church history, sources, letters, journals, etc., and we think their accounts or interpretations should be believed. But significant contradictory sources are often omitted. Sometimes the ellipses, or the ... is used, leaving out words that change the meaning or provide needed context. Unless you're familiar with a subject matter, you wouldn't know. I can tell you that most criticisms using church history are cleared up just by going back and reading the source documents in their entirety, or by reading other source documents from the same time period. In the letter to a CES director, again, I'm using that example a lot because he has a lot of these criticisms listed. He claims that Joseph Smith copied the Book of Mormon from the first book of Napoleon. And he had this book in his grade school as a child. Then he gives two paragraphs, one from the Book of Mormon and one from the Book of Napoleon. So this one is from the Napoleon. "Condemn not the writing and account, the first book of Napoleon, upon the face of the earth. It came to pass, the land, their inheritance is of gold or silver," and so on, so on. "Small in stature because of the perverse wickedness of the people." And he compares this with a paragraph in the Book of Mormon. "Condemn not the writing and account, the first book of Nephi, upon the face of the earth. It came to pass, the land, the inheritance, gold, all because of the wickedness of the people." I guess we should quit the church now, because we can see he copied. But the problem is these little ... these little things. Because this is the Book of Mormon script lines. This is where they came from. This first part came from the title page, 1 Nephi 1:11. Then we have to go back to 1 Nephi 1:5. Then we skip to 1 Nephi 2:11 just for those two words. And then we go to 1 Nephi 2:11, then 1 Nephi 2:10. We go back again. And then we jump all the way here to 1 Nephi 3:17. And this paragraph not only is that way in the Book of Mormon, even in the Book of Napoleon, he takes his quotes covering 25 pages to put his paragraph together. So I look at that and I say, and I'm going to follow this person out of the church? No, thank you. No, I don't want that. Now, we can take the same type of thing, and anybody here know who Richard Dawkins is? You've heard of him? Yeah, he's an atheist, right? Doesn't believe in God. Did you know he quotes the Bible? Look, here's John 11:26, and Richard Dawkins, in his book called The Selfish Gene, he quoted it exactly. Only he didn't. This was taken up by the same trick we did with the other one. So it's trickery. Another method of misrepresentation is using strange words. One critic writes, Mormons worship an extraterrestrial humanoid. I guess that's true, since God does not live on earth, so that makes him extraterrestrial, and we're created in his image, so he's humanoid. But I don't think Mormons believe God is a little green alien who crashed his flying saucer. Another claim is the Book of Mormon can't be true because there have been 4,000 changes made to the Book of Mormon. This is a lie. This is a complete fabrication. There is nothing true about that statement. It's completely wrong. There's really been 105,000 changes to the Book of Mormon. They can't even get their criticism right. Can't believe it. So I've read most of these changes, and there are changes. They're grammar, punctuation, and wording for clear things up, and they're really not significant. I find them little more to be language clarifications. So now that we've reaffirmed that everything you read on the internet might not be true, let's move on to the next trap. This trap I call the secret. When we hear something we haven't heard before, we sometimes think we've learned a big secret. This gives us a feeling of power. We know something that other people don't know. This is where we get into even gossip, where we tell somebody else secretly what it is. And the critics of the church like to really emphasize this. In the letter to a CES director again, the author tries to say things are in an obscure place or the church is not transparent. But the reality is there are no secrets about church history. Most of the critics got their information from the church. The church history department has been busily compiling the Joseph Smith papers and putting them on the internet for all to see. Church archives have been scanned and put onto a DVD set with 80 DVDs. I have a copy of that. So I have a copy of the church archives. And it's amazing. It even has the calendars and day books from some of the general authorities. And it has notes in there that said, my wife told me to buy groceries on the way home from the church office building, and things like that. So it's very detailed. There are many books and articles that faithfully discuss these subjects today, and many of these subjects have been written about in the Liahona and the Ensign magazines. I have yet to learn one significant issue from the church that has not been carefully examined by faithful members who are also experts in their fields. And they remain faithful, believing members. We have Brother Jensen here, who's a church historian, and he's read all of the history stuff that's supposed to be bad, and yet he's a faithful member. How come? Well, because he doesn't find anything bad there. But you may ask, why have I not heard these things in Sunday school? Well, we need to understand that Sunday school is not a church history class. Sunday school uses history to teach gospel principles. That's what it's for. For example, in Sunday school, you will learn that Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon through the gift and power of God. You generally won't have a discussion of whether he used the Nephite interpreters, whether the Nephite interpreters were the Urim and Thummim, or whether he used a personal seer stone placed at the bottom of the hat. Because the method of translation does not make a difference in our life or to our salvation. If you want to examine all the different statements regarding the process of how he translated the record, you have to go to one of those top secret places we hide things, like the Liahona, and read about it there. Or you could read it in BYU Studies, or you could read about it in a good history book. The Mormon History Association offers conferences every year that explore in depth everything you could possibly imagine from church history. When I attended, a church general authority gave the opening remarks, gave a talk there. So the church is not afraid of this history. Now, I teach classes at a college. I'm a college teacher, university professor. Although it's not a university, I only teach the first 2 years. I never hear students complain, "I've never heard this before. Mr. Gordon, you're teaching me something I've never heard before. The educational system must have been lying to me because I've never heard this before." And yet I hear this at church. Instead of being upset when we hear something new, we should be grateful we've learned something new and be assured that you are not the first person who has heard it. These claims have been around for a long time. The third trap we deal with is the fact that we like to dwell on the negative. Let me tell you a story about that. Imagine for a moment that you are a young woman. I know some of you brethren might have difficulty with this, but imagine you're a young woman, maybe 18, and you've been asked out by a very handsome young man on a date. So you're going to go on this date. And so you get a nice dress, and you do your hair, and you look in the mirror and you say, "I look pretty good." And you go downstairs and your parents say, "Wow, you look really nice." And your date comes to the door, and you see him. When he comes to the door, his jaw drops, and he says, "Wow, you look beautiful." And you're feeling pretty good. And you go to eat at a restaurant. And at the restaurant, one of your friends from school comes by and says, "Hi," and leans over and whispers in your ear, "Why did you wear that dress? It makes you look fat." Now, when you go home, what are you going to think about? Are you going to think about how everyone liked your dress? Or are you going to think about your one friend who said that dress made you look fat? And are you ever going to wear that dress again? I know what my daughters say. They say, "No way. No, I'd never wear it again." It's human nature to focus on the negative, even if it isn't true. And as my wife put it the other day, it's because we're afraid it might be true. So we focus on it. So it is with the church. We can know many things that support its truthfulness. We can even have a witness of the Spirit. But then we notice or hear a negative thing or two, and we immediately focus on that. Focusing on the negative erodes our faith. We should focus on the positive things, the things that we know, and not the negative things or the things that we don't know. Another trap we fall into sometimes is the desire to sin. Sometimes we might hope or want the church not to be true. Maybe we're trying to fit in and bowing to social pressure. Maybe we have a new girlfriend or a boyfriend. Maybe it's something else. But we sometimes forget the blessings of the gospel and are attracted to the short-term pleasures of life. This is a natural feeling. It's a human condition, but it doesn't mean the church isn't true. The next trap is one that we need to be aware of, and I'm going to direct this to the sisters in the room again. Assume your best friend called you. She calls you and says she just saw your husband going into a hotel room with another woman. How do you feel? This is your best friend. This isn't a stranger. This is a friend you trust. And so how do you feel about that? Now suppose your husband comes home and you say, "Were you in this area of town?" "Well, yes. How did you know?" "Were you at this hotel?" "Well, yes, I was." "Did you carry books for another woman? Did you carry a suitcase for another woman?" "Well, yes, I did." "Oh, so now you know your friend told you the truth." Then your husband goes on to explain, "Yes, my office, work, we had a seminar we were all required to go to for legal training. And the presenter couldn't carry the books out of her car, so my boss asked me to go out and help her carry the books from her car and bring it into the seminar. It was really a good seminar. You can call my boss if you want and talk to him about it." Do you feel better? Maybe a little bit, but do you still feel, The feelings we get when our trust has been violated don't go away very easily. Early in my marriage, my wife woke up one morning and told me she dreamed I did something I shouldn't. I was in trouble for a week. and it was just a dream. So the feelings of betrayal don't go away very easily. The reason I bring this up is because when someone has been upset by one of these critical church issues, they too have that feeling of a violation of trust. And so to just respond to the claims with, oh, here's the answer, here's a FairMormon article that responds to your question right away, that's not going to completely solve the problem. It's a step towards the solution, but it's not the whole solution. Other things have to be done to rebuild the trust. This is where scripture, prayer, service become very important. And there are also other evidences. Do that. Excellent. Good. Other evidence that they can read about. Things you can read about, which the description of Lehi's journey is an amazing evidence of the Book of Mormon. The place called Nahum, or Nahum, however you want to pronounce it, is an amazing evidence. Chiasm in the Book of Mormon in Alma chapter 36. 2 Nephi chapter 4, which is a psalm where Nephi follows a Hebraic psalm format that Joseph Smith could not have known. And the Book of Mormon witnesses and more. You'll hear about some of these other things today. As we recognize that we learn by study and by faith, and as we avoid these personal traps in our thinking, I believe we'll be more prepared to recognize and dispel both criticism and doubt and help our children. Many issues we face comes down to the single question, is the Book of Mormon true? If it is, then Joseph Smith was a prophet, and we have a prophet today. We may not understand the issues, but the church is being led by a prophet of God. In parting, I would like to say, as I've worked with many church members navigating the waters of criticism and doubt, I have always focused on the words of Peter in the book of John, chapter 6. Many people had left Jesus at that time because he taught things that were hard. And in verse 67 through 69, he asks the 12 apostles, "Will ye also go away?" And Simon Peter he answered him and said, "Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life, and we believe and are sure that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and I believe the Book of Mormon came from God, which made Joseph Smith a prophet. I believe we have a prophet of God today. Where else would I go? Here is where I find the words of eternal life. And I say this in Jesus' name, amen. Now, I took too long with my talk. I know I did. It was too short. It was shorter than that. I think what I'll do is, we have some questions. Why doesn't the church officially create a site where one can go to find answers to critics' claims? They're starting to do that a little bit with the gospel topics area on the church. And I know they're talking to people now saying, what topic should we put up next? But they're slowly putting it out there. They didn't do it before because some things don't have a definite answer. Some things where we can make good guesses, but we don't know. One of the things we sometimes say in church is, I go to this church because it gives me all the answers. And I say sometimes, oh yeah, so what was the pre-existence like, really? And I go like, oh, and so we don't have all of the answers. We have some of the answers. Do you think it would be good to integrate information, historic character in more detail, and new statements from the church? And yes, I do. I think it is good to integrate more information into that. I think the church is moving that way. Why haven't I learned about church history at Seminary Institute church history class? Mountain Meadows Massacre, Polygamy, Book of Mormon, Blacks in the Priesthood. That's a great question. I think there were people, when we started FairMormon, all of our members, except for one, came from outside of Utah. And people in Utah said, we don't have a problem. Why do we need to do this? And I think what's happened is people outside of Utah kept saying, no, there really is a problem. We need to address these. And the church has recognized this now, and they are moving in that direction. And that's why Elder Ballard was talking to the seminary people and saying, we need to do this more. So it's happening, not yet. If we say that the translation and changes of the Book of Mormon are not significant, why do we say we believe in the Bible as long as it is translated correctly? Aren't these transmissions faults minor, especially if we have the Holy Ghost? Yes, I think there's some questions of translation. We use the word translation, but I think a better word might be transmission, meaning what parts of the Bible came forward and what got left out. Because I think translation is, I personally believe, is not the right word that was used there. So I could say Joseph Smith made a mistake, he used the wrong word. No, I think he was just using his common words from his time period. So yeah, there have been changes in the Book of Mormon. They're minor. There are 6 people say are significant, and I've read them and I don't find them significant. It's the ones where he talks about Jesus Christ being God, and Joseph Smith changed it to being the Son of God, and Joseph Smith made that change. And the other one is the scriptures where it talks about people being white and delightsome, and Joseph Smith changed one of those 2 verses into being pure and delightsome, because I think the word white was caught up in the emotional language of that time period. So when people said white, they thought something different than what Nephi meant, and Marvin Perkins will talk about that, I'm sure. Got a few more. The tapir. Yes. The Book of Mormon, not having horses in America, they had the tapir. The tapir is an animal, and there's some belief that there has one theory been put forward that the tapir, which is a small animal, was called a horse by the natives. And whether it was or wasn't, I don't know, but it's a possibility. Who wrote the essays on LDS.org, and what was the contribution from FairMormon? Some of the speakers today helped with the essays on LDS.org. That's all I'll say. So, thank you very much.